All right, this video focuses on political parties and more specifically, a little background info about the formation of political parties, and then just a quick review of what we talked about earlier in the year about ideological differences between the three major political parties you have to know on the AP test. First things first, there the two takes on political parties that you should be familiar with. The first is the Constitution's take on political parties. There are none, right, mentioned in the Constitution. And that's because at the time in the Constitution's sort of like writing in 1787, there are no political parties that are formed. Like the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists aren't really considered to be political parties, right? So the first political parties don't form until after like the government started. Like they formed during Washington's presidency, really out of disputes between two of Washington's cabinet members. Secretary of the Treasury Hamilton and Secretary of State Jefferson disagree on almost every issue, and people sort of like line up in support behind their individual opinions, and that sort of gives birth to the first political parties. And clearly, this has had a major impact on politics. But it's important to note that the Constitution doesn't like create or establish or even acknowledge or sort of mention political parties. And then Washington's take, as I mentioned, he was president while the political parties formed, and almost immediately he thought they were a bad idea. And in his farewell address, among other things that he warns against, one of them is a warning about the future negative impact that political parties could have. And you can read sort of like the quote, but he sort of felt like the political parties would be used by like cunning individuals to sort of like manipulate the people and to pit them against each other. And I think if you look at politics in the modern time period, then you could say, man, he was pretty spot on that. So these are just two takes on political parties, the Constitution, which really doesn't have one, and then Washington's sort of warning, which I think you could argue has kind of come to fruition. And then again, it's important just kind of like know the differences between like the major sort of like parties. Ideologically speaking, we talked about like liberals, conservatives, and libertarians earlier in the year. And again, they sort of differ on like how much like economic freedom a person should have and how much personal freedom an individual should have. So it makes sense if you're supporting more economic freedom, that you want like less government involvement in that area, right? So liberals, again, if you remember what we talked about, they tend to support like more personal freedoms, less like government regulation of personal like freedom and conduct. But they definitely support like greater regulation of like the economy. So conservatives would be the opposite, right? They want less regulation of the economy, they want more economic freedom, but they want like maybe more government regulation of people's personal freedoms. So looking at a major difference like legalization of marijuana, liberals tend to be much more in support of like legalization, like less government regulation of that, more personal freedom to to be able to purchase marijuana either recreationally or medically if you want it. Whereas conservatives are more apt to oppose that, right? And then libertarians, they just want more freedom and less government involvement across the board. They want less government, less government, less government, more freedom, more freedom, more freedom, whether that's economic or personal. Libertarians just want less government regulation and more personal sort of like freedom.